Today we are going credit 3. Okay, and credit 3 and 4 are the most important credits in this course. But before we start with the discussion on the topics that we have to do today, I need to tell you that you have seen your Urkan reports, the plagiarism reports, and around 3 or 4 of you are having a high plagiarism rate. So you have to bring it down to 10%, okay? And you have time till 20th. So what I'm exactly doing is I'm lending you a helping hand in preparing yourself for research and writing, okay? Because you won't be able to submit anything without it going through a plagiarism test. Nothing goes across, okay? So the only problem in checking plagiarism remains that sometimes like it's a bit awkward. So you get to know, for example, when I uploaded, तो जिसका पहले चला गया, जिसका बाद में चला गया, so there is a bit of problem. If Eras goes first and Geets goes first, so it says that you have copied from Era, but we remove that. समझ में आ रहा है? So that doesn't matter. Number one, and number two, in translation, it's very difficult to capture plagiarism. For example, if someone is doing it in Marathi, someone is doing it in Hindi, because much of the infrastructure is only in English. Okay. So I hope that those of you who have to resubmit will resubmit so that I can give you my comments and we can go ahead with your second internal test, which will be a quiz. That said, let's start today's lecture with a video. And
some claim the philosophy departments are
after that, we'll do a bit of a reading and then shift to my board time today and tell you something about how feminism, women, and philosophy can be read together. This is what we are going to do in the next few lectures. How we can read feminism, women, and philosophy, rather philosophy together. Okay, so let's start. Can you see my desktop?
Yes, sir.
Okay, do let me know whether you are able to hear.
Can you put up our videos now?
They be right. Yeah. Coming up next on Factual Feminist. In 2014, women earned 28% of the PhDs in philosophy. By contrast, they earned close to 60%.
Are you able to hear?
Anthropology, sociology, 75% in psychology. Yes, when it comes to gender,
yes, sir.
It's more like math and physics.
Can
Women are being held back, kept away by rampant sexism.
What?
Can you put up our videos now because the presentation is lagging?
Presentation is?
Lagging. So can you put up our videos now?
I have put the video on.
No, I'm saying can we put up our videos?
Off our videos. Yeah. Put them off. We don't need them now. Yeah. Put off your videos.
Okay, sir.
Yeah.
Overt and unconscious. And in the past few years, there's been a surge of tendentious and alarmist articles, blogs, studies on the precarious state of women in philosophy. There's even a song. Well, recently, some in this group have ascended to power in the American Philosophical Association, and they're hard at work addressing this alleged crisis. Now, I know that some of you are thinking, why should I care about what happens in the American Philosophical Association? Well, if you want to understand what's happening at colleges and universities today, you should pay close attention. In 2008, MIT feminist philosopher Sally Haslander published an article in an academic journal where she lamented that philosophy is combative and judgmental. She called it a hyper-masculine environment. Now look, I was a philosophy professor, my husband was a philosophy professor, my stepson is a philosophy professor. I have been around a lot of philosophers. They are many things, but hypermasculine isn't one of them. Well, nonetheless, Haslanger was passionate, actually quite combative. She attacked analytic philosophy for favoring masculine terms such as penetrating, seminal, and rigorous. And she described this deep well of rage inside her, rage over how she and others had been treated. Now, Haslanger called on established feminists, that was her phrase, established feminists should organize and resist the masculinization of philosophy spaces. Now, Professor Haslanger expected a backlash. Instead, she ignited a hostile takeover. By 2013, she had attained a top position in the American Philosophical Association, and she wrote in the New York Times that her group's persistent activism is becoming institutionalized. Her article ended with these words: "We are on the winning side now. We will not relent, so it's only a matter of time." Well, the factual feminist is concerned. Academic philosophy prides itself on logic, rules of evidence, and analytic rigor. But Haslanger and others on her winning side, they appear to be making their case by other means: dogma, misinformation, pop psychology. Well, let's begin with logic. This movement is premised on a double standard. It treats the philosophy gender disparity as self-evidently wrong, even tragic, according to Yale philosopher Josh Knobe. But much larger disparities that favor women in fields like sociology, anthropology, psychology, even veterinary medicine, these are ignored. But if disciplines with more men are ipso facto unjust, then how can fields with more women be acceptable? To be consistent, the activists should be calling for gender parity across the curriculum. Now, this APA-sponsored poster is turning up in philosophy departments. Well, maybe departments should have posters like these with psycho bros or psychologize or anthropologies. The movement also ignores the finding, consistently documented by a vast empirical literature, that on average, men and women tend to have somewhat different interests. For example, a large study of youth found that males are more likely to have strong interests in investigative and theoretical pursuits, but mathematically gifted females, on the other hand, were more likely to show preferences for social and artistic pursuits. Now, these are just patterns holding on average, and we should be careful not to overgeneralize. But this research helps explain why different fields show different ratios of men to women, as in these numbers indicating majors at Princeton University. When the New York Times invited 5 feminist philosophers to discuss the gender gap in 2013, not one of them entertained the possibility that women might tend to find other subjects more interesting. Instead, the groups talked exclusively about things like male privilege, harassment, and stereotypes. But plenty of other fields in which women are now outperforming men once had stereotypes and harassment. If these weren't barriers to women elsewhere, why is philosophy different? Well, let's turn away from anecdotes and distorted logic and consider a few facts. First, it makes sense that women received only 28% of the philosophy PhDs in 2014, because in the same year they received only 29% of undergraduate degrees in philosophy. Why so few female majors? Well, to find out, Australian researchers conducted a survey of students in their most popular introductory class at the University of Sydney. Now, the female students were less likely to pursue philosophy than the men, but not because they were put off by the argumentative style or the hostile environment. Rather, it was because they were just less interested in the field from the start. That didn't change when the professor focused on women in the coursework or always used female pronouns. A second point, philosophy departments are not biased against women in hiring. There may be fewer interested in philosophy to pursue it as a career, but those who do are more likely to get jobs. According to a study by the APA between 2012 and 2015, other things being equal, female PhDs were 65% more likely than men to find a permanent academic job within 2 years of graduating. And look at the APA itself. Over the past 5 years, women have held about 60% of its top offices. For 2016, women held all the top positions. It's difficult to see how a profession that hires women at a higher rate than it hires men, that awards women its top leadership positions, it's hard to see how it's rigged against women. Without pushback, This movement could mire academic philosophers in divisive gender politics for years and actually scare women away. I mean, the way the activists describe philosophy is hyper-masculine, unsupportive, filling women with rage. Why would any woman want to enter such a field? In my senior year of high school, my mother gave me a copy of Bertrand Russell's History of Western Philosophy, and I relished that book. It was written by a man. It was all about men like Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, Nietzsche. But I thought it was written for me. I wasn't aware that I had entered some kind of unsafe, hyper-masculine space. To me, it felt like sacred space. I pursued a BA and PhD in philosophy and taught it for more than 20 years. It never crossed my mind, not in high school or as my academic career progressed, that I would be unwelcome because I was a woman. Well, I'm glad that today's grievance blogs and alarmist theories and tirades, I'm glad they were around then to discourage me. And I'm sorry to think of their influence today on young women who are drawn to this great and challenging calling. Well, let me know what you think of what's going on in philosophy. If you are a philosophy student or a professor and the APA is up to some mischief, let me know.
So, could you follow what she's trying to say?
Yes, sir. That
Can
in the field of philosophy, as that it has been labeled as a hyper masculine field
yeah,
because many of the philosophers which who are well known are male only, and there
yeah.
are very few female philosophers. Like one could count them on his or her fingers. So that she is actually defending philosophy that it isn't so hyper masculine, that a lot of females aren't just simply interested in philosophy, in the field of philosophy since the beginning, from the start, and those who are actually quite welcome into the field.
Okay. Do you think she's right?
Personally, I do think she is right that women are do welcome in the field of philosophy, but on a certain aspect, in a certain aspect, if you see that men, certain men do have this, what do you call, this mindset that you know how they deny the women the right to speak, how they do not pay that much attention to the opinion of a woman as they would to another man.
Mm-hmm.
So that still persists in the field of philosophy too, I think.
Okay. I won't say anything as of now. Anyone else wants to join in?
Even though I agree with her saying that it is not a very hyper masculine, but then again the question is still there that even when women try to make any arguments or the simply the thing which we learned in the very beginning lectures, that women are not associated with reason, and they are not assertive enough to make a point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's begin. Okay. And we'll come back to this video at the end of this lecture. Okay. Read. Uh, Bhakti, read the first paragraph.
The past 25 years have seen an explosion of feminist writing on the philosophical canon, a development that has clear parallels in other disciplines like literature and art history. Since most of the writing is, in one way or other, critical of the tradition, a natural question to ask is, why does the history of philosophy have importance for feminist philosophers? The question assumes that the history of philosophy is of importance for feminists, an assumption that is warranted by the sheer volume of recent feminist writing on the canon. This entry explores the different ways that feminist philosophers are interacting with the Western philosophical tradition.
Yeah, this is it. Now, just forget about the video that we watched a few minutes ago. So, there's a fact and we have a lot of scholarship around us where we have feminist philosophers interpreting the history of philosophy or the mainstream history of Western philosophy as it is presented to us or as it has been presented to us. Okay, you take up any text of history of philosophy or you take up any canonical exercise that is done in the history of Western philosophy, and you'll figure out that there's a problem. Okay, that is one reason that feminist philosophers have become interested in the history of philosophy. Okay, and they have come up with a lot of writing, with lot of scholarship on this history of philosophy. Okay, now what have these writings tried to achieve? Like, what are these feminist writings on the history of philosophy trying to achieve? Go to the second one.
Feminist philosophers engaged in a project of rereading and reforming the philosophical canon have noticed two significant areas of concern. The first is the problem of historical exclusion. Feminist philosophers are faced with a tradition that believes that there are no women philosophers, and if there are any, they are unimportant.
Just
Of
stop.
course,
Okay, just stop. The first thing that these feminist writings on the history of philosophy come up with is that there is a problem of historical exclusion within history of philosophy regarding women. Okay, just note this point: historical exclusion. Okay, what it means is that the discipline of philosophy has excluded women or discounted women to be considered as philosophers. Or even if there have been women philosophers, they have been considered unimportant. They have been considered as if they are not worth taking up as philosophers. Is this true? Do you think it's true?
Yes, sir, definitely.
Isn't it? Do you think, someone else? Can someone say that no, it's not true? Can someone among you say that no, it is not true? कोई नहीं?
no, sir.
I thought that to justify this historical exclusion, let's hear it from the horse's mouth. Okay. I will not include Simone de Beauvoir here because we will be doing her in our fourth credit. I have been using it quite often. I have an interview of Hannah Arendt, okay, where she tackles this problem of historical exclusion. Let's go through it. Okay. Anyways, audio won't matter because the interview is in German, so you can read from the footnotes. Is that fine?
Okay, sir.
Shall I start?
Definitely, sir. Yes, sir.
So, could you get what she's saying?
Yes, sir.
Can someone try to jump in? Is it interesting?
It is quite interesting where she doesn't want herself to be associated with philosophy. She says that she has learned philosophy and everything, but then she kind of doesn't want to associate with the field.
No, she doesn't only say that. She says something more as well. Come on. कोई और? कोई और? Anyone else? अरे तुम लोग को सुनाई नहीं देता क्या?
अभी से कुछ बोलने को नहीं है, शायद दोबारा देखें तो कुछ आए.
Okay, let me. I'll send you the link to this interview. It is the first two questions that are important for our topic. Okay. So she doesn't say that she does not want to be counted as a philosopher. Okay. She says that she has not been accepted in the circle of philosophy. She has not been accepted by philosophers. Okay. And that is why she's a bit estranged and she says that no, she has said goodbye to philosophy once for and all. Okay, so she says that yes, it's a masculine occupation, and in a masculine occupation, such as that of being a philosopher, Hannah Arendt, being a woman, has not been counted as philosopher. So she's directly talking about the historical exclusion that feminist philosophers have talked about. Are you getting it? Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Is it clear now?
Yes, sir.
So it is directly coming from the horse's mouth. So you have Simone de Beauvoir saying the same thing as well. Okay, Simone de Beauvoir was for a pretty long time considered subsidiary to Sartre in philosophy. She was not counted as a philosopher. Okay, she was counted as a novelist more often. Okay, but let's not go into that debate. We have something more to do here. So this is what you mean by historical exclusion. And it doesn't mean that it counts a woman as a feminist philosopher. No, it counts a woman. It has to count a woman as a woman philosopher. She can do anything. She doesn't need to do feminism. Okay. She can do ontology. She can do metaphysics. She can do political philosophy. She can do social philosophy. She can do aesthetics. But she has to be counted as a philosopher. So feminist rereading of the history of philosophy, okay, argues that there has been a historical erasure. Okay, women have never been considered as philosophers, and this is what Hannah Arendt was saying. I'll share the link with you. Go ahead from here now. Bhakti, go ahead. We have lost Bhakti, yeah. Geet, go ahead, you read.
Of course, women are not entirely absent from the history of philosophy, and that brings us to the second challenge we face. Canonical philosophers have had plenty to say about women and what we are like. In general terms, we often find that philosophical norms like reason and objectivity are defined in contrast to matter, the irrational, or whatever a given philosopher associates with women and the feminine. Our tradition tells us, either implicitly through images and metaphors, or explicitly in so many words, that philosophy itself and its norms of reason and objectivity exclude everything that is feminine or associated with women.
You just give me a minute. Did we see? Yeah. So Then there is the second point that they raise, and the second point is a point where they say that it's not just that women have been excluded from the canon of being counted as philosophers. The second is that the way in which the language of philosophy has talked about women, the language of philosophy has been anti-woman, is another aspect that we get, that we can excavate from the history of philosophy. Okay, the way the texts of philosophy, the archive of history of philosophy talks about women is somehow quite different and quite opposite and quite hostile to women. Is it clear? This is the second point. So it's not just that women have been excluded, okay, but even the language of philosophy has been very masculine, has been very male centric. Okay, philosophy has used a language that is completely hostile to women. And then they give a very beautiful example that in general terms, that we find that philosophical norms like reason and objectivity, when what philosophy stands for traditionally is usually termed as reason, logic, argument, objectivity. This is usually defined in contrast to irrationality, okay, subjectivity, um, emotion, etc. And those things are associated with women and the feminine. Are you getting it? So this automatically, this language automatically makes philosophy a hostile discipline for women. It automatically lends space to be, or to show itself as if it's a discipline completely against women. Did you get that?
Yes, sir.
समझ में आया ये? Okay,
Yes, sir.
समझ में आया ये? Okay,
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
let me go to the blackboard now. So तुम लोग के पास एक ऑप्शन आएगा मेरा वीडियो ये करने का, पिन करने का. When you pin it, it will become bigger and you will be able to see the board. Can you see my board?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
sir.
Okay, so shall I start?
Yes,
So the
Sure, sir.
history of philosophy, or philosophy itself, or the language of philosophy itself, differentiates between reason and emotion. ये चलता ही नहीं है. Okay. No, I'll make it bigger. समझ में अभी दिख रहा है? Can you see?
yes, yes, sir.
ये दिख रहा है जो मैंने बोर्ड पे लिखा?
Yes, sir.
ज्यादा क्लियरली नहीं दिख रहा। हाँ सर, थोड़ा थोड़ा दिख रहा है।
या देखते हैं, कोई ना कोई तो दिख जाएगा. Okay. So what happens usually is that this is what they want to tell us, is that reason is associated with mind and emotion is associated with
Heart.
Feelings.
emotion is associated with what?
Feelings.
Heart and
Feelings.
feelings. No, emotion is a feeling itself. What is it associated with? It's not considered logical emotion usually. It's considered something else.
Irrational. Hysterical.
Irrational. So what is the space of irrationality in our body? Where does
Heart.
it lie?
Mind.
No, mind is rational for philosophy.
So the heart itself, then the option remains.
Body.
Oh, okay.
This takes you to the famous distinction, Cartesian dualism of mind and body. Okay. So, what the feminist reading or rereading of history of philosophy tells you is that the language of philosophy, as if, okay, dichotomizes or differentiates women and men into a division that modern history of philosophy, starting from Francis Bacon and René Descartes, tries to establish, and that is the famous distinction of body and matter, body and mind, matter and mind. Okay, matter stands for body, mind stands for thinking. Okay, now let's try to understand three ways in which this mind-body dualism, even though it is central to Descartes, gets reproduced into producing ideologies. Okay, so when we take this mind-body dualism to patriarchy, how it helps patriarchy is that it turns man into the mind and woman into the body. That becomes one of the primary reasons for women being objectified, because this particular language that philosophy uses, okay, dichotomizes men and women through the logic of mind-body dualism. It considers men to be having everything that is needed for abstraction, that is needed for doing logic, that's needed for doing argument, that's needed for being rational, and it discounts women from having all those aspects. Rather, it gives women all the aspects that are reducible to body. That is why that most of the entertainment industry, much of the society, much of the happenings in our societies, when they talk of women, they have to do with body. समझ में आ रहा है? That's why woman gets reduced to her biology, to her appearance, because this is what she gets reduced to. समझ में आया? So it's connected to the mind-body dualism. Clear?
Yes, sir.
Clear? ठीक है, देखा कहां से चीज निकलती है, एक मेटाफिजिकल चीज कहां तुम्हारे सोसाइटी में किस तरीके से दिखती है और पता भी नहीं चलता. Okay, shall we move to the second one?
Sure, sir.
This mind-body dualism, okay, this also gives rise to something which we'll be doing in a fourth semester for your modern Indian thinkers paper, which is usually called as Orientalism and Occidentalism. So what happens in Orientalism and Occidentalism is that West replaces the mind and East becomes body. समझ में आ रहा है? Are you following me?
Sir, can you repeat once again?
So what happens is that this logic of mind-body dualism, that is essential for our second argument with regard to the study of feminist study of history of philosophy, is that it reproduces into the logic of Orientalism and Occidentalism by considering the non-Western world as if it's bodily and considering the Western world as if it is mind. That makes the West as the thinker and the non-West as the body where this thinking is to be applied. समझ में आ रहा है? That is one of the reasons that much of the theorization takes place in the West and we consume the derivative discourses that usually come up from the West. समझ में आ रहा है? So in a sense, this reproduction of mind-body dualism into Orientalism and Occidentalism becomes the backbone of colonialism. Okay, where the Westerners think that the Easterners are barbarians and they need to be made democratic, they need to be made rational, they need to be made civilized, etc., etc. These were the logic. These are the main logical points, quote unquote logical points that are usually given when colonialism is justified or when unilateral actions are justified. For example, Afghanistan, we have Husseini Najmuddin here. So America is coming to Afghanistan thinking the logic is that we want to make them democratic. They are barbarians. They are not democratic at all. Okay, but it can be very difficult. Are you getting it? You cannot impose. Okay, so what happens in this proper mind body dualism is that you are able to impose things on a body because you assume that the body cannot think. Same happens in the patriarchal structure of society. When the man attains the status of being akin to a mind, he is easily and automatically able to impose things on a woman because the woman is automatically reduced into a bodily structure. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
समझ में आया?
Yes, sir.
समझ में आया? So this reproduces. मैं तुम लोग को अभी एक दो ही बता रहा हूँ, ठीक है? I can contextualize it in the Indian context, and I'll give you only an example. I would go into that. So the dichotomy of an upper caste and lower caste is similar. Are you getting it? Where the upper caste becomes the mind and the lower caste becomes the body. Okay, समझ में आ रहा है? You only need to understand what are the conceptual parameters which define a body and what are the conceptual parameters which define a mind. Okay, and once you are clear with that, the moment you are clear with that, you will be able to figure out where it gets reproduced. But as of now, it gets reproduced for us in the dichotomous structures or dichotomous language that is usually used in the canonical texts of philosophy, where reason and objectivity and argument are associated with man and irrationality and emotion are associated with a woman. So this is another way in which the feminist history of Western philosophy tries to show that there is very less space for women in the texts that have propped up in the major canon or the mainstream history of Western philosophy. We are going to do three thinkers. We are going to do Kant, we are going to do Plato, and we are going to do Aristotle. And one of them we'll do from original. इन तीनों में से तो एक को तो हम originally पढ़ेंगे, उसके एक्सेप्ट. अभी मैंने डिसाइड नहीं किया है कि किसको पढ़ेंगे, क्योंकि अभी इसके ये हफ्ता इसी के साथ जाएगा. Okay, so is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Now we have
Yes,
two
sir.
points. We have only 2 points today because we'll be continuing with this exercise in the next 2 lectures or next 1 lecture at least. We have 2 points that the feminist rereading of Western philosophy talks about the historical exclusion of no-women and as if women cannot be philosophers, number 1. And number 2, even when it talks about women, even when the texts of philosophy or philosophers talk about women, they use a language which is anti-woman, okay, which is masculine, okay, which is like, which somehow fits the mind-body dualism, okay, where the woman is reduced to body and the man or male is defined championed as being a mind. Now let's go to the video again. Do you think that woman is right? What, or if she is right, what does she get right?
So can you repeat the question?
अब क्योंकि हमने देखा है कि हिस्टोरिकल एक्सक्लूजन है वुमेन का, ओके, It's only now that women are being considered as philosophers. समझ में आ रहा है? और दूसरा, हिस्ट्री ऑफ फिलोसफी में जो भी टेक्सचुअल रेफरेंसेस वुमेन को लेके हैं वो नेगेटिव हैं. अब इन दो चीजों को दिमाग में रखते हुए, इफ वी ट्राई टू go through the video again, if we try to remind ourselves what the video was about, which video, the first video that I showed you in the beginning, क्या लगता है?
सर अभी भी ये लगता है कि वो लेडी अभी भी सही है, बिकॉज वो अभी करंट सिनेरियो की बात कर रही है, हाउ नाउ वुमेन आर एक्सेप्टेड इनटू द फिलोसॉफिकल रेल्म. बट हाना अरेंट के टाइम में आई कंप्लीटली अग्री कि या उस टाइम पे इतना ज्यादा मैस्कुलिन रेजिम था पूरे फिलोसॉफी का, तो वो एक्सेप्टेड नहीं हुआ होगा. दैट इज कंप्लीटली एक्सेप्टेबल. बट दैट लेडी इज टॉकिंग अबाउट द करंट सिनेरियो. So I think as of now the field has progressed and has grown more and is more acceptable now.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Someone else? किसी और को कुछ बोलना है?
I disagree with that woman saying when she was reading that book, which was definitely masculine in the like in the writing part, and then she decided to say that I did not feel that it was masculine. I did feel that it was for me and all.
Both of you are right, but let me just थोड़ा इसको खोल देते हैं तुम लोग के आर्ग्यूमेंट्स को. ठीक है, गीत जो कह रहा है कि the contemporary times, like she mentions that 5 years, पिछले 5 साल में ऐसा हुआ है. So it's very problematic to justify something where you have a history of 25 years and last 5 years. Okay, this is a very imbalanced comparison. Okay, so what she tries to do is she's trying to justify a point through an imbalanced comparison, but she's right. The contemporary scenario is changing. Okay, but number two, which is a more problematic point, is she's mixing the points. She's mixing the issue of historical exclusion of women and the way the texts of texts of philosophy are portraying women. Okay, these are completely two different issues. Okay, historical exclusion of women as being not counted as philosophers is a separate issue, and the language used in philosophical arguments against women or regarding women is a completely different point. She mixes these two, and you cannot mix these two. When she goes and tries to tell us what Sally Helsinger wrote, Sally Helsinger was not writing about philosophy today. She was writing about the archive of philosophy, how philosophy presents women, how philosophy talks about women, what are the words that philosophy has been using about women. Okay, which is a very justified way of doing research. Okay, but this woman says that since she has also been a philosopher and she has been all the time revolved by philosophers, that is not the case. But Halsinger is not making that point. Halsinger is talking about philosophy as a discipline rather than philosophy as a profession. Okay, so which is the first point. Okay, exclusion is about profession. Okay, you cannot be called as a philosopher professionally. But the second has to do with text. Okay, it has to do with how the language of philosophy has been talking about women. Is it clear? That is the only problem. So she is right as far as the contemporary situation goes, but she is wrong as far as she tries to discredit the entire history. Okay, उसको लग रहा है कि जो हिस्ट्री में हुआ है वो हुआ ही नहीं है. समझ में आ रहा है?
Yes, sir, but to defend
Yes,
that
sir.
woman, I would like to say that the point that she is trying to push is to motivate young girls to go into philosophy and not let these certain claims that it is a hyper masculine field push them back towards a different field.
That's what I'm saying. So being a hyper masculine field in terms of it being a profession and being a hypermasculine field in terms of its language. These are completely different things. Okay, philosophy no longer is a hypermasculine field in the West, or maybe it may be considered as no longer being a hypermasculine field in terms of profession. Okay, but you cannot guarantee the same as far as the language of philosophy is concerned.
Definitely.
समझ में आ रहा है? So she's mixing the two. Why I liked that, मैंने उस वीडियो को 2-4 बार देखा है, तो मुझे लगा नहीं, ये मुझे तुम लोग को दिखाना चाहिए, बिकॉज शी इज कंफ्यूजिंग थिंग्स, क्योंकि उसको 5 या 8 मिनट का वीडियो बनाना है, और उस वीडियो में वो बहुत सारी चीजें she brings in an article by Sally Helsinger, and she says that look, this is how people are doing PhDs. Okay, people are not interested in philosophy just because they have an interest in something else. That's a loose argument. That's a you usually call it a slippery slope argument. ऐसा नहीं बोल सकते. But she's right as far as the profession now in the West is concerned, but she is completely wrong as far as the language of philosophy is concerned. Okay, and you cannot change that. It's not something which can be changed in a jiffy. मतलब ऐसा नहीं है कि 5 साल में पूरा फिलॉसफी का जो एक पर्टिकुलर लैंग्वेज और ओरिएंटेशन बना हुआ है, विच इज बूस्टिंग इटसेल्फ एज बीइंग रैशनल, आर्गुमेंटेटिव, एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा, उसको तुम इधर उधर कर सकते हो. वो पॉसिबल नहीं है. दैट्स अ वेरी डिफिकल्ट जॉब. ओके,
Yes, sir.
कोई और, किसी और को कुछ बोलना है? नहीं? Chalo, we'll meet tomorrow. We'll continue the discussion. We have to read a few sections of this important article from the encyclopedia before moving to the primary readings, maybe on Aristotle, Kant. अभी मुझे पता नहीं है कौन सा 3 करेंगे, क्योंकि एक कर पाएंगे, 2 सेकेंडरी सोर्सेस से करेंगे, बट मैं चाहता हूँ कि कम से कम एक करें. So I'll see you tomorrow. Okay, all the best. Okay, and be ready. We are going to have a quiz of 10 marks for you. No, quiz of 15 marks for you, maybe towards the end of October on Moodle as part of your internal examination, or beginning November, jaisa bhi hoga, tentatively. Okay, it will be during the class only. Okay. Okay, all the
sir.
best.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
The mode of the examination will be that of the second years, right? The MCQs online.
Yeah, MCQs. It only allows MCQs.
Okay,
Yeah.
sir. Bye,
Okay.
sir.
Okay, bye.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All the best.